Alright guys, we're just going to fix a couple of little things here before we're ready to print. If you pull out your circuit board and have a look, down by that X motor driver there's a little white plug. And the wires are actually switched on that one. Just like they were with our end stop wires. So we just have to pull him out. These are changed exactly the same way as with the earlier ones we fixed. Just find something thin like a little screwdriver to push him down and pull him out. And then when you're done, switch them around. And plug him back in there. And if you've got it right, if you look at my video here, you see the red should be closer to the screw. Now we can switch him on. And the way to test if it's working properly is that this fan should now be spinning. If you've got power on, that guy should be spinning. Right, next, we've got the floating print bed. Now I'm just removing these nuts right now because they were only there to hold things together, but we'll use them in a moment, so don't throw them away. If you don't have the springs already, grab them out. And if they're stuck together, just pull them apart and put them on the screws like this. One each. Now, if you have a look at your y-axis, you've got these 4 big holes. That's where these screws are going to go. Now first you've got to be quite careful that the springs don't fall off. So I'm sort of going to hold them there with my fingers while I flip it over and get it in place. This can be a bit of a pain. I want to make sure that arrow is pointing forwards towards you. That little arrow is just to show you which way it goes. So line up the screws now with those 4 holes, and we've got to get them all to drop in. Might take a little bit of fiddling. There we go. Now once they're in, it should be nice and bouncy. Lovely and bouncy. So the next thing is to get those little flange nuts and put them on the bottom. And make sure the flange is pointing up, just like that. Now don't make them super tight right now. Just screw them finger tight all the way up. And do the same for all 4. Next, grab your hex screwdriver and we're just going to tighten all these guys down. Now you don't want to over tighten these. You can see the gaps between the springs. You want to keep screwing until there's just a tiny gap. Don't fully crush the spring, just until it's sort of fully compressed. So there should still be a tiny bit of gap between the springs. You might have to hold the nut until it's a little bit tight first, but once you've got it tight, it should go. And do that for all 4. And there we go. Next thing, grab the paper tape. And this is a nice, porous, sort of rough, bumpy surface that we're actually going to print on. If I can find the end of the tape, yeah, there we go. So just peel a bit off and lay it down nice and flat as you can get it, and lined up with that front edge. There we go. Slice the edge off. And do the same thing again, just next to the first piece. Now the important thing is not to overlap them, because you don't want to make this thicker. Because the thickness of the tape is actually going to be noticeable for when we're printing. So if anything, you can have a little gap, but try and get them as close as you can. So cut him off. And the worst one is the back one, because it's not quite big enough for a whole bit of tape. So cut the piece off first. Slip him in there, making sure not to overlap it with the tape we've already got. And then just cut off that extra bit at the back. It's a bit easier if you've got a sharp cutting knife. You can see my scissors couldn't quite do it there. So I'm just going to cut it quite roughly. I'm sure you can do it nicer than my one. So make it nice and smooth, flatten it out, make sure there's no little air bubbles. And I'm just going to find those screws and I'm going to break the paper so I can find them later, because we can still tighten them and loosen them. But we just need to make sure they're broken through for now so we can find them later. Where is he? There he is. Alright, so now we're going to quickly download some apps that we'll need a little bit later, but we'll get the downloads going first. So I'll show you how to Google for them. The first one you want is Repeater. R-E-P-E-T-I-E-R. If you've got the Windows one, download the Windows one. If you're using a Mac, of course, download the Mac one. And Repeater is the software for communicating with your printer. The other thing you'll need is Cura. That's C-U-R-A. And this is the one that will convert a nice 3D file into something that the printer can understand. So Cura, just quickly get the Windows version if you've got Windows, Mac if you've got Mac. All right, now while they are downloading, we've got one more thing to do. Turn off the printer, plug in the USB. Now we need to get the actual firmware that will run on the Arduino in the printer. So go to this website and you'll find a list of my public software that I've made and made it public here. And you want the Marlin RealRobots one. So click on him. Find the download button right there. Download the zip file. Now that's a quick one, so open him up and make sure you take out this Marlin folder. You have to make sure it's not compressed. So you have to uncompress it. You can do that by right-clicking and going uncompress, or what I'm going to do is drag it out and put it in my documents folder here. There we go. Drag out Marlin. That will uncompress. So open him up. There's a lot of files in here, but the main one is the Marlin file, that one right there. So open him up. He'll open in Arduino. And what you want to do is go to Tools, set the board. And the board is going to be the Arduino Genuino Mega or Mega 25. That one. And then set the port, just like every time we've used Arduino. And once you set the board and port, you can press Upload. And that will upload the code to our 3D printer. Once that's uploaded, go and check the serial monitor, and it's probably talking nonsense. And that's because the baud rate is set wrong. So set it to 250,000. And then you should get a list of, basically that's the basic settings of the printer that he's reporting. And now the fun part. Let's try and actually move it. So make sure all your power and everything is on and type in G0 space X10 and press enter. And your printer should move, just like mine did then. X0 goes back again. So G0 means a movement, and then it's X and then a position, or Y in the position. That one didn't work because my Y was already all the way forward. Let's see if I move it back again. Let's go Z15. Now that's not very good. You see how only one side went up, the other one stuck. This is why we start with small moves, just 5 millimeters, 10 millimeters, and you can see what's happening there. So what I'm going to do now, and this may or may not happen to you, I'm going to turn off the power, and I'm just going to level this out again. I think what happened was the two sides weren't level, and so there's a bit too much force on the nuts, so they couldn't actually spin. So let me just straighten those guys out, turn him back on. and give it another move. And you see this time it works beautifully. So G0, Z0 moves him back to 0. Yeah, and do a few moves. Make sure it moves happily. It might squeak a bit, but the more level it is, the smoother it should run. Next, we need to test the end stop switches. Now, there's a code for that. It's M119. And when you type that in, it'll show you here the end stop status. So if the switches aren't down, they should say open. If I press the switch for X, M119 again, it should show triggered. And then when it's open, open. Let's try it again with the other switches. So hold down the Z, press M119. Sorry, let me get my finger in a better spot there. And it should show triggered for the Z. And when I do it again without pressing it, open. So that's just making sure every switch works. The last one is the Y axis switch. Make sure all these wires aren't in the way as well. So that shows as triggered. M119 again, open. So all my switches are working. So let's use them. We're actually going to home the machine now so we can find where 0 is. We type in G28, X. So G28 is home. And you can see it moved and found that switch there. Let's try Y. See, it moves all the way back to the switch. So G28Z, and that will do the same thing. It's going to come down, but there's a problem here that it's going to crash into the bed before it hits that switch. So I'm just going to switch the power off now when I'm quite close. I'm going to hit the reset button because it's going to keep trying to home forever. So that little button there on the top just resets everything. It's just like turning it off and on again. And let's get a bit closer. So you see I'm quite close to the bed. I'm almost going to crash into it. But that screw is miles away from the switch. Absolute miles. So this one we actually have to fiddle with a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just adjust these screws manually. So I'm turning that with my hand until we're about 1 millimeter away from the bed. And then do the same thing for the other side. So about 1 millimeter gap, and you want both sides to have pretty much the same gap. And once you've done that, that means those two sides are level now, and we're just going to adjust this screw. And keep screwing it down. And we want to screw it until the light just turns on. So just until the switch is pressed. And there we go. So stop there. So now the switch is pretty much at where the home should be. And I'm going to do a G28Z there. And watch him come back down. So now he's going to home happily. And what he'll do is he'll do one quick hit, pull back, and then slowly move down the second time. And that's just to make sure he's really accurate so he can come in slowly. So we still have to level the bed. And the way we do that is for this last little millimeter, I'm going to grab a bit of paper and I'm just going to loosen this screw. And as I loosen this screw, the piece of wood is going to get pushed away by the spring. And what I'm trying to do is loosen it until I can just feel the paper being gripped. So we don't want the paper to be fully stuck. We just want to make sure we can feel the paper under that print head. And so what we're trying to do is just get a paper distance. We don't actually want the head pressing into the sticky tape. We want just like the tiniest little gap, like 0.1 millimeters. So do that on every side. And you'll find that by the time you've done each side, you'll have to start again. So go through twice, basically until you can go to each of the four corners and basically everywhere on the board, and it will just fit the paper underneath. We're trying to get an even 0.1 millimeter gap everywhere on the bed. So we're going to home everything. So that's just G28, no X, no Y, no Z. And you'll see that will home every axis in order. So it does X, then Y, and finally now Z. All right, so let's open up Repeatia, which we have downloaded and which I'm sure you can manage to install by yourself. Now we've got to connect this one. So go to printer settings, and it's the same as in Arduino. You've got to choose the port, choose the baud rate, which is 250,000. You'll have to make sure you've disconnected in Arduino already as well. Now press connect, and it should light up blue, and down the bottom show some information. If you go to controls, you should have a few controls. Yours might look a little bit different to mine, as there's a few different versions of Repeatia. I think I've got an old one. And you can see, if we move the Z axis, he's going to move up. If I move the X axis, so this software is really just sending. When I press that, it's saying G0 X10. It's just saving me typing it out myself. And you can see I've got the home button, so I can home it again. And so I can control everything from Repeatia without having to know any of the G codes. Alright, so move into the middle and put yourself up pretty high, and we're going to test the hot end. So there'll be something here. You want to set it 200 degrees and turn it on. Now you can see my temperature numbers going up there. You may have to click up here and get the temperature curve and the big graph, and you can see the temperature working its way up. So we just have to sort of sit tight until it gets up near 200 degrees. So you see it gets right up there, and then it'll sort of level off. And once you're there, we can test the extruder. So this one is going to push plastic out. So let's test that out. So I'm going to push out 10 millimeters of plastic. And this may happen to you. You'll see it's trying to push, but it's not actually getting there. It's pushing forward a bit and then getting pushed back. And that's because we don't have enough power to the motors. So switch off, and we're going to adjust the motor power just a little bit. And to adjust the motor power, what we're going to do, once again, make sure everything's turned off. Get a little flathead screwdriver, the smallest one you've got, and carefully put it in this little potentiometer here, and just turn it no more than a 1/4 turn to the right. And that's it. And make sure the only one you're changing is that 4th motor driver. That's the driver for the extruder motor. Now you see I've got an error there, a thermal runaway. That's because there was no power to the heater, and the machine didn't know what was going on. The temperature wasn't doing what it expected. So if that happens, you're going to have to disconnect and then reconnect to reset it. I'm going to turn the hot end heater back on, and then move the extruder again, and you can see this time it's moving pretty happily. If yours is still kicking back a little bit, you can go back and adjust that motor driver again. But we should be going fine now. Yep, and you can even see the whole plastic wheel is getting pulled around there. Yep, so that's happily pulling the plastic through. If you look at your hot end, you should see some plastic getting squirted out. If you haven't, it just means the plastic hasn't reached there yet, and you might have to do a few more extruder moves, or else just push the plastic through yourself until it gets all the way to the hot end. It could also be you've got a jam. If you do have more trouble here, let me know and I'll talk you through how to fix a jam yet, because we haven't gone through that yet. But that's it for now. We're actually ready now to go and do our first print. So we'll save that for the next video, because this one's run a bit longer than I thought. So good work, guys. We've finished building a printer. Let's do our first print. See you in the next video.